that, and you'll see whether you're ready.
Red light is on. Okay.
Welcome, and we'd like to begin our June 3rd council meeting, and we're going to begin with a Indigenous territorial acknowledgement. Excuse me. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather, land on which we're broadcasting from today, as the land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Shinaton people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. June is Indigenous History Month, an opportunity for everyone to learn about the unique heritage, history, and experience of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples across Turtle Island who call this area home. It's time to honor stories, achievements, and strength of Indigenous peoples. It's also time to change perspectives and build better relationships by demonstrating follow-through on the recommendations in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. National Indigenous Peoples Day is recognized on June 21st, a day with significant symbolism as the summer solstice. At the beginning of council meetings, we pause to think about the needs of our community. So may we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. June is also Pride Month. So the month of June is a time to recognize and celebrate Two-Spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, or 2SL LGBTQ plus communities. Pride is celebrated in June to mark when the first large-scale protests for this community took place, most notably the Stonewall riots in 1969. The rainbow is an important symbol of diversity, support, and welcome. The many rainbows throughout our community serve as a reminder that while there is a lot to celebrate, there's a lot more work to do. So happy Pride, and it's great to see my fellow councillors wearing some beautiful colors today. So we will now move to a disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Yes. Seeing none, we're going to go to our presentations, and we're going to have Brian and Rita do our wampum belt presentation.
Siguli, the Greygoats, who hears the leading gets, or Gua leading one alone, only the ugly one, Hanjon. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Mayor and City Council for giving us this opportunity to do this presentation today to yourselves and also to the directors, commissioners, and all those that are present here today to witness this this event, this very historic event for the city of Waterloo. Back in 2019, council made a stance that they would be looking at implementation and understanding the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report that was put out that had those 94 calls to action. One of those calls to action actually is the impetus for why we're here today, or why I brought this gentleman and his wife here today to give us an education on some historical background to Haudenosaunee people and how we have interacted and looked at each other about that relationship, how we build and maintain relationships long before 1867 when Canada was actually born. A lot of this information, a lot of these belts go back millennia. And we've carried these stories amongst our people all this time, and we share them. We have a responsibility to share these stories about this relationship that we have with not just with each other, but also our natural surroundings as well. And that's what some of these belts talk about, is about that relationship and how we maintain it through what we do and how we interact on a daily basis. So I just want to, again, give acknowledgement and thanks Jean Go to having this opportunity to be able to do this for the city of Waterloo and its community members. So I've asked my friend, my brother here, his English name is Martin Paulus. He's from my home community. He's taken up this task or this journey and helped educate a vast number of people. So I reached out to him and I asked him if he could help us as well, and he agreed. So today he has some presentations for the city, and I'll give him an opportunity to introduce himself and explain more about what he's done. Yonko.
Sigoli, Skana Goga, Galant Hyundi Nyangyats, Otahyon Nibigidalot Kale Onayata Aga, Nibigi Hanjot. Yeah, it's an honor and a privilege to be here today, and you know, it's something that we've started out on this journey over about the past 5 years. I've begun to make these wampum belts, and it's not called wampum in our language, though. It's called onigolha. Onigolha means basically shells on a string, but the meaning they have extends well beyond the artistic value of it. It is, like Brian mentions, a historical document. It's almost like a history book, some of these belts. Wampum was never used as money, as people often misinterpret. It's always been, to us, a much more important thing than money. It's a pledge of, I guess, fidelity. It's a pledge that we mean business, that we're going to be honest with each other, that we're going to have no lies and speak face to face in all truth. So that's what a lot of these wampum belts start to explain. We can't know everything that happened at the time they were created, and I've made these replicas out of glass beads. They're from Czechoslovakia. They're glass beads. They're high quality, opaque, but the real wampum was not made out of glass. It was made, like Brian mentioned, millennium before the settler governments came to Turtle Island, and it's made out of actual living beings. So this one here is what gives us the purple. It's called a quahog shell, and it's like basically just like a clam, but it has a little bit of purple, or like the purple around the edge of it is what makes the dark beads. And it comes from a living being out of the ocean, and it only occurs basically between Long Island and maybe South Carolina. So very rare. And it doesn't occur on the other coast or anywhere else really in the world. So the quahog shell is what they've used for the nice deep purple color. The color that represents our nation mostly is that deep purple. And then the other one was made out of like a whelk shell. There's different sizes of channeled whelk, but they would take the little cone in the middle there and make the white beads out of it. So just a little explanation too, you'll see most of the belts have the basic purple and white. And when we talk about wampum, they say you always show both sides of it. You turn it around and display it to people, because there's always two sides to every story. That's also an important. This represents procedural fairness in a way, because you're to listen to each side of the story. So I guess back to how I became involved in making this onigolha was, we went to, sorry, this is my wife here, Rita Van Ever, you want to come up? She's from Onondaga, Seneca, also one of the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. Haudenosaunee, as we call ourselves. Haudenosaunee literally means people of the longhouse. So in two ways that's true, because we actually did live in a long elm bark longhouse, organized by matrilineal clans. So I would go live with my wife. She'd be the leader of that household. The women owned the land. The Great Law, or the Guyana Lagoa, which we call it, the Great Law of Peace, actually talks about the women are the progenitors of the nation. They own the land, and they own all the titles that the chiefs have. So men in Iroquois society are basically diplomats, protectors, and mouthpieces. This is the real authority right here. So they can depose the chiefs or nominate them. So they hold all the titles and the land and everything, like I say, so very powerful in contrast to most European nations, which are patrilineal, largely matrilineal, totally matrilineal all across the Haudenosaunee. So it was a literal longhouse, but it was also like a figurative longhouse, because our territory extended basically from, the eastern edge of, or the western edge of Toronto, all the way to Chicago, south to about Pittsburgh, and north to Simcoe, or Lake Simcoe. So there was a treaty made between the Haudenosaunee and the British government in 1701 called the Nanfan Treaty. The beaver hunting grounds is it's more commonly known as. So the deal between the Haudenosaunee, who basically inhabited this land 1680 to 1700, and they've always been battling with the French and their allies. So come 1701, we put our lands in the protection of the British Crown, and they promised to protect it for us for all times, for all of our relatives, for all time. We were to have free hunting, free from all disturbances, forever. So forever means forever. It doesn't mean till 1800 when we don't need you no more, throw you out. It means forever. That's what these belts mean. It's supposed to be forever. As soon as the Haudenosaunee were not militarily required anymore, they kind of got forgotten, and these deals were forgotten, and our land started getting sold. So right now we're on the Haldeman deed, right? Like the Six Nations grant from 1794, 6 miles wide on either side of the Grand River from mouth to source. That's still Iroquois land. I don't care what piece of paper you have. This land is stolen. So, I mean, when we bring these belts out, it's to remind the governments that the promises they made to us. Like this belt right here, for instance. Hold that one up. The two-row Gaswenta, Digneyo Hate Gaswenta, or Deo Hate Gaswenta. This one comes from 1613 at the Treaty of Tawaganchi between the Iroquois and mostly the Mohawk, I'd say at that time, and the settler government, the Dutch. So when the settlers came to Turtle Island, or North America as we know it, they tried to say, this is all ours and you're our children. We said, no, we're not. We're not your children. We're more like your brothers. So that belt represents the two parallel lines of the societies which are supposed to live separate and apart but equal. They're the same size, they're parallel, and the white in between the two rows talks about peace, friendship, and respect, and that's supposed to last forever. You'll notice the belts, they don't just end, they go from the beginning into the future, so that line never ends. It's meant to carry on forever. I think that the two-row should be part of the Constitution of Canada, because that's the promises that were made. You know, all we ever wanted to be was left alone. That never happened. We wanted to have our own government. That never happened. You know, I say that they hate us so much that they don't even consider the beginnings of Canada or the United States. Canada was saved by the Six Nations in the War of 1812 when the Americans had come over and almost seized the land. But the Six Nations came and drove them back and saved the country then. Back in 1777, during the American Revolution, the Oneida, which is our nation, was split apart from the rest of the Six Nations because of the colonial governments fighting each other, right? French fighting Britain. They're fighting over our land. Nobody said they could fight over our land or have it when this war was over, you know, or solicit our people for their wars. But that's exactly what happened. So that belt there represents the original deal, which was we're separate, we're equal. Our laws rule us, your laws rule you. That was the original deal. And we still hold that true today. It's the other government that never did. So Digneyo Hate Gaswenta, that's one of the first ones. It goes from 1613 with the Dutch. Then comes the French, which we had a relationship with too, but it eventually ends up as the covenant chain, the silver covenant chain with the British. This is from 1677. So this one depicts two figures on it, joined by a chain. When the relationship of the two-row was with the Dutch, they talked about, we have a relationship. Our ship is tied to your shore. Our ship is tied to a tree on your shore with rope. But no, rope can rot and rust and break. So they went to a iron chain next when they had the relationship with the French. But no, the iron chain can also rust and break and deteriorate. Finally, in 1677, when we have this relationship with the British Crown, they say we're going to make it out of a chain of silver. Silver doesn't rust; it'll tarnish, but you can shine it back up. That's what that stands for. We're supposed to frequently re-shine that relationship with each other to understand where this relationship came from and reinforce the peace, power, and respect. So the silver covenant chain is what the relationship is still. It still is, even though it's from 1677. A Quebec Superior Court last year recognize that this is a relationship between a country and the Haudenosaunee still to this day. Just like the 1701 treaty is too. I did a treaty hunting trial near London in about 2006, and the 1701 that we just talked about, the Nanfan Treaty, was held to be still valid and subsisting. So it's not, these aren't just relics from the past. They're reminiscent of a relationship that persists till this day. So you can pass that one around too. This is the relationship between the governments. As Brian mentioned, there was not terra nullius when people came to North America. I find it really offensive that province is called Newfoundland. That's not the truth. There was people living there. It's not no Newfoundland. We've always inhabited that there. What happened when they came there was they eliminated the First Nations like Boytuk, so they could claim it and have it for themselves. So it's not Newfoundland. This wasn't terra nullius. A piece of paper written by the Pope doesn't give people the right to come and steal our land and destroy our culture. It doesn't. Not when we made good faith relationships like this. So the wampum really is a pledge of fidelity right from the beginning that is supposed to be held true till this day. So as he mentioned, like there's agreements that were made between our societies and before the settlers even came. So we'll talk about one of those next. This one is what's kind of become to be known as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy flag. What it's actually called is the Five Nations Belt, or the Hiawatha Belt. It's not Hiawatha from the Longfellow poems, it's Hiawatha from our society. He was kind of like a chief, and he went into mourning because his daughters were killed. His heart was laying on the ground, so he goes to himself, how am I going to develop a process whereby I can help somebody who has this deep a profound grief? So he came up with wampum strings, and then that was used in condolence of people in grief or to reinstate chiefs at certain times when they pass. But this belt here is a representation of the formation of the Great Law of Peace between the Five Nations of Iroquois who were warring before, the date of this formation is kind of, undecided. We call it time immemorial, but lately scientists have been saying it's around 1200, could potentially be 900 BC when this was formed, the Great Law of Peace. And it was formed by a non-Iroquois person. The peacemaker, as we call him, was of Huron descent. And he came across the Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, to the Haudenosaunee Nations, because we generally lived south of the border in the Finger Lakes region of New York. The reason we have presence in and north of the lakes and the St. Lawrence River is because of the beaver hunting grounds treaty we made in 1701. So our traditional lands, we weren't placed here, we were placed there, but this is a part of our beaver hunting grounds. Anyhow, the Five Nations belt, it's now Six Nations because we adopted the Tuscarora. The Oneidas adopted the Tuscarora 1722. So now when you talk about us, it's the Six Nations. This belt was made before then. I don't know how long ago, it's at least 1,000 years ago probably. But what it represents is if you're looking from the south to the north to our nations, starting on the far side, like the easternmost, that triangle on the left is Mohawk. Then you come to this way and it's Oneida. Onondaga is the keeper of the belts and the central fire of the Confederacy. Cayuga, Seneca. And people often ask, well, why is there different sizes of square on that belt? Does it mean somebody's more important? No, it doesn't. Oneida and Cayuga are adopting nations of the Six Nations from the east and west, so they need more land. This is a depiction of the land, and it also represents the formation. Again, it goes from past to present or future. The belt doesn't end. At some day, maybe we'll develop another belt to recognize the Tuscarora, to recognize a few other of our ancient nations that the Great Law talks about. If you follow the great white roots of peace, Owiske roots back to the Galondut, which is the peaceful tree. The white pine is our symbol. If you follow those great white roots of peace back to the white pine in our nations, and you're willing to abide by the rules of our nation, you're welcome to live with us. That's always the way it's been. A lot of our people were adopted from different nations after war, or like there's even cases where a non-native person would be adopted into our nations just because they're a good person. It's about treating people right. It's about peace, friendship, and respect, or peace, power, and righteousness, as we say in our teachings as well. Power is not about, oh, I can control this and that. Power is about what comes from the people, what they tell you to do. If you can do what the people tell you to do, that's power. Peace, always we talk about peace. The whole formation of our society is talking about peace. Every time I make these belts, when it's on a loom before I cut it off, it's almost like giving birth to the belt, because you cut the cords like symbolic of when the baby's cut from the mother. These things come from water too. We all come from water. Our mother's water. So there's a lot of relations there. Those strings, when you cut them, I pray for it to be used for promotion of our rights, educating about us, and promotion of peace. And we pray for peace every day. We really need it right now. Look at the state of the world, right? You know, that breaks our heart too, even though it doesn't affect us, but just the concept of people dying for nothing, for materialism, and the destruction of the earth that's going on right now too. You know, the earth is rebelling against us right now. Look what's happening. We poke too many holes in the amniotic sac of the sky. How many missiles have gone out there? How many rockets have gone into outer space? That's a protective layer around this. I call the earth, which we call Yuganoha, it's like a blue marble in the middle of the blackness of the outer space. What a beautiful gem there, right? And all we can do is destroy it. For what? For money, for power, for control, for things. That's not what the world's for. The world's to support us, and we're to give thanks for that every day. Just the other day, when it was April 8th, I guess, right, when the eclipse came, we took our belts out there, Port Burwell, seen the total eclipse. What an amazing thing. It was like the same thing our ancestors seen 1,000 years ago in exactly the same spot. Very powerful. So we took some of these out. Usually all these belts have been to the water too. They get blessed. We put tobacco or onunkwet or ohungwe into the water for them to say, give them some strength, give them some character, give them some power of that water. I keep actual wampum beads around my looms, so hopefully it'll rub off on some of these, belts. But once it's created, I think it's as valid as the originals. The originals are largely deteriorated. They were stolen. They were put in museums. Our original Oneida tribal belt is in the Chicago Field History Museum. So we hope to get it back someday. As you've seen in the area, Six Nations has got a lot from about 1989. They're repatriating some of these belts back from Britain and private collections. So I'll talk a little bit, that one that just got passed around, again, that was the Confederacy belt and pre-contact. This is one of the ones Brian asked me to make too for him, and it's a very important one. This is a pre-contact belt that was made between the First Nations. Sebedugwat Shira, basically dish with one spoon. It's an agreement between the First Nations of North America or Turtle Island to share the resources of the earth. We're not to fight over it. That's why there's a spoon. If there was a knife, there'd be bloodshed. When it's all surrounded in peace by the white, and the middle of the dish, it's said to contain, well, it represents all the gifts of creation, but particularly we prized beaver tail soup, which we sampled a couple years ago at Kanawaki. It's very delicious. So this one here is talking about you keep the land clean, you don't take more than you need, and there's enough for everybody to share, and we never fight over it. I think that's an important lesson still for world politics, right? There's enough bounty of the whole world that there doesn't have to be anybody poor. There doesn't have to be anybody sleeping in the street. What has to change is the mind. The mind has to change of the leaders, of the people, to share the resources that, hey, what do you need, 10 cars? Or do you want to see that guy have a house and some food tonight? You know, that's the way we think. It's not about accumulation. You get a greater satisfaction, I guess, from giving. Like you hear about the potlatch of the West Coast, but we practice that too. I mean, it just feels good to give somebody something and to take care of them, to share what we have. It's not about accumulation at all. That's never part of our creed. This one here is it speaks to the status of the Haudenosaunee as a confederacy throughout history. We were always our own separate nations, and we dealt with the sovereign newcomers on that basis. they would come to us with these belts. If they didn't have a belt, we wouldn't even talk to them. Because of the, I guess, the effort it takes to make these belts and what they stand for, that makes you know that we're serious about what we're talking here. So somebody would come and try, deal with us. If they didn't have this, we wouldn't even talk to them. But comes the time that after contact, this belt is from 1710. And it's, you've heard of some people might have heard of the 4 Mohawk kings who ventured to Britain in 1710 and met with Queen Anne. This is a little bit after the 1701 treaty I was talking about. But you have King Hendrik in a famous portrait from 1710 over in the court of Queen Anne. They were entertained by the sovereigns. They were taken around. They were treated as equals. They might have been treated as a little bit of oddities, but they were treated as a nation, and this is leaders of their nation. So King Hendrik presents this to her and says, the French are on our lands. Look at all these X's here. That represents the forts they have on our lands, which you pledged to protect. So we need you to come back and help us militarily to get them out of our lands. We didn't say they could live there. And she did, to her credit, right? Maybe a few years later, she sent military backup. But also the other part of it was send some ministry too, because these black robes are ruining our people. They're destroying them. They're making them greedy. They're making them mean. So please send some ministry too, which she did. So this belt goes to show that the Haudenosaunee didn't deal with provinces or even municipalities. We're up here with the sovereign nations. That's the original way that two-row meant was reinforced again after the Treaty of 1701. This is 1710, King Hendrik's belt presented to Queen Anne. I assume it's still there somewhere. We haven't seen it lately, but it's over 300 years old. Some of them talk about events. Some of them talk about things that happen to you. This one right here is called the prophecy or the coming of the white faces. So this belt was made to represent the fact that when the settler people came here, they're weak, they're sick, they're hungry, they're lost. They don't know how to survive, they're dying. So this belt represents the outside rafters, I guess, which is the Haudenosaunee societies, dark, thick, and established. And then you've got the sickly white newcomers in the middle who are struggling to survive. But we didn't let them die. We shared our stuff with them, right? We helped them. We stood them up in this country. We put the rafters beside them and stood them up. So that's always a reminder to the fact that when they first came here, they weren't the dominant society. We had the passion and compassion to help them and take care of them. And what we got in return wasn't very nice. So pass that one around. You can pass them around, yeah. I don't know how much time I got, about another 10 minutes maybe, but this one here, very beautiful design. It's the Oneida Nation tribal belt. This one probably comes from about 1778, 1779. As I mentioned earlier, when the American Revolution broke out, the Confederacy was split down the middle. Oneida and Tuscarora, who we adopted, more or less sided with the Americans, the Patriots. And the rest of the Confederacy sort of sided with the British Crown. So at that point, the central fire of the Confederacy, which is held in Onondaga, Syracuse, was covered. Our Confederacy was broken for a few years there. Then after all the fighting and everything had settled down, Oneida recreates this belt and goes back to the heart of the Confederacy at Onondaga and says, you know, we didn't bring this war upon us. We want to be part of this ancient Confederacy again. And we're bringing our brother back. And now we're 6 nations coming back together. Each one of these represents the nation, the triangle, and then the square around them. Each nation has their own, I guess, jurisdiction. They have to come to peace with the other nations to make decisions on behalf of the whole Confederacy. So this belt, taken back to Onondaga, 1789, rejoined the Confederacy. That's the only time in history the Confederacy fire has ever been put out, because it caused brothers to fight each other, shed blood against each other, destroy each other's nations, you know, over newcomers making us fight each other. So I'm glad we came back to the peace, and they still have recitals of the Great Law every year. This year it's going to be in, well, it was in Oneida, Wisconsin last year, but I think Six Nations this year. Six Nations this year. So every year they go around, and it's a 5-day thing where you recite the Great Law of Peace, where we came from, how we elect our leaders. There's about 3 or 4 versions of the Great Law. I encourage you to read it. Those concepts still hold true today. You know, they're timeless, right? It's about justice. It's about peace. It's about giving. It's about respect. So those are still things we hold valuable today. And then there's new belts being made too. I create a few myself. I made one that looks like an American flag with the Haudenosaunee up in the corner where the stars are. Because the way I explain that one is that it should be called the United States of Haudenosaunee. There's 6 paths of peace which represent our nations, and then 7 rivers of blood that go through it because of the colonies that came there. So that stars and stripes has a little bit different meaning to us because they fought over our land. And then when the war was over, they gave the enemy half of North America. They hated us so much they wouldn't even give their allies nothing. France owned all the way down to Louisiana, right down to New Orleans. So even though they were defeated on the plains of Abraham, the British chose to give them half of North America while ignoring us. So that's why we still fight for these rights. We were done wrong at the time of settlement here. After we were no longer militarily valued, they treated us like dogs and worse. You've all heard the stories of slaughter across the plains, you know, with Gatling guns, with cannons, right? They didn't have the courage to fight us face to face. It's like today, they're not fighting in Gaza either. They're pressing a button. That's not war. That's murder, right? So yeah, I mean, these concepts still are valued today. They're ancient, but I mean, when you talk about the natural law, the way the world functions, we can't improve that. We've tried to for a couple hundred years, but we can't improve that. Just let it be. That's the way it comes to its own homeostasis, its own peace. And you know, our people used to be able to communicate with nature because there was peace, because we were immersed in it, because we respected it. You know, and we're kind of getting away from that now. But hopefully some of these teachings, I'm taking these to the schools too, talking to the kids about it. And they're excited about it, so it gives us a little bit of hope for the future that they'll listen and they'll take these lessons. Like they talk about a wampum belt being a sort of a river of information, and it flows to the next generation. You put into as much as you can, but you pass it on to the next generation, and they take it on. So that's what we're trying to do here. I'll just show you another one that I made. This is my own design. It's not a traditional belt, but this one's called the Chippewa-Munsee Oneida Unity Belt. Right along the Thames River there's Oneida on one side and Chippewa and Munsee on the other side. Delaware or Lenape community, Munsee, and Ojibwe, Chippewas of the Thames, and us, Haudenosaunee. But we've lived there now for a couple hundred years together. There's a lot of intermarriage. So what this belt represents is CMO, Chippewa, Munsee, Oneida. The figures are the nations. They're holding hands. We've taken each other by the arm, which is an ancient saying of us too, that we're your allies, we love you. And we promise to work together for the next 7 generations' future. The lines on the end represent the Thames River on both sides, and Odonyot, or Migizi, the eagle, which is large in our culture. He sits atop the tree of peace, warning of dangers coming, protecting us. Every time I take these belts out, I see an eagle that day. Every time. It's happened every time. So he's watching what we're doing. He communicates with the Creator to see what you're doing. So this is one that we presented to the other nations in 2019. They took it to heart. They keep it at their office. Every quarter we have a CMO meeting and they bring their belts. We set it out. You know, we burn tobacco for them. So a modern day treaty and belt is just as valid as an older one. And I don't like the way that governments and courts and you know, say that our causes are barred by time, or latches they call it in a legal sense. It doesn't matter how much time has gone by, it doesn't make a wrong act right, no matter what you do, right? So that act was still wrong, and we still remember that. It's never going to go away. The law isn't very kind to us, and we have to fight for years and decades. Finally, after many, many years, They gave Haida Gwaii back to the BC nations, right, on Vancouver Island. It was always theirs, but they had to spend $100 million in 50 years to fight for it. That's not reconciliation. I think reconciliation looks a little bit better than that. And then just because they say Canada's policy is that you're not getting your land back, well, that's just your policy. That's not no law. You look at South America, you look at New Zealand, they got their land back. It's that same colonizer government. It's possible. It just needs to come from here and from here. I think that's it for me, unless you have any questions. I really value the opportunity to come and, teach a little bit about our culture and what it means to us. These belts are not a forgotten relic. They're a history book, and they should be binding on the governments as they were on day one. And that's what we fight for. That's why we fight for it. And it's not just for us either. We want justice for everybody. We want peace for the world. We've been preaching that for 100 years now. 100 years ago, one of our chiefs from Six Nations named Diskahe, Levi General, went to the League of Nations asking them to recognize us as a nation because of all these treaties. 1924 that was. He spent 6 months there, almost 2 years actually. And he got blackballed by the Canadian government. When he came back, he got sick, so he came back to the United States, landed in New York. Canada wouldn't let him back into this country. He's from Six Nations, just down the road here. But because he went and did that, because he went and advocated for us at the League of Nations, they blackballed him and never let him back in Canada until the day he died. He died in the United States. So on his deathbed, he made one of his friends promise to carry on the fight for that border. We have a treaty also, 1794, the Jay Treaty, which promises us free passage between these two countries with our own personal goods, every day, every year, all year, for the 13 moons of the year, right? So that one we keep alive every July. Third Saturday in July, we go to the border crossing and we cross at Niagara Falls, exercising those Indigenous rights. And, just to keep the kids aware of what our rights are and to actually assert ancient treaty rights that were promised to us, and now they're blocked. So we're not inventing these things. We've always had these rights. They were just taken away from us. We had the land. It was taken away from us. We had our religion. It was taken away from us. We had our language. It was taken away from us. We had our hair. They cut it off. The worst thing I heard was a young man in residential school, about 5 years old, didn't know anything other than Oneida. But because he couldn't speak English, he got his tongue pinched with the pliers. You quit speaking Oneida with the pliers. Imagine how mad that hurts. That's how they treated our kids. They beat the Indian out of us. They beat the language out of us. And we're trying to get it back. There's still a few people that really are trying. So this is why we come here today, to talk about things like this and educate people so that, future generations and power players can do the right thing and honor the agreements they made, because that's all we ever wanted. And we still keep these agreements too on our behalf. Yeah, Uncle?
Thank you so much for your presentation. Would any council members like to ask any questions or make any comments?
Yeah, it's a lot to absorb, but
On behalf of the City Council and our community, I'd like to extend our heartfelt gratitude for your presentation, and thank you so much for sharing your culture and wisdom and our history with us. We look forward just to continue to build a respectful relationship.
yeah, and we realize that. That's very much appreciated by us too. So the more we can get out and do things like this, I think the better it'll get. And again, yeah, go for inviting us today.
Thank you.
Okay, to really complete this this journey that my friend has made to here tonight, I want to ask Councillor Roach, as tonight's chair, if you would like to come up to the front, please. Mayor McCabe, if you would like to come up to the front as well. And Commissioner Ron Ormson, would you like to come up to the front too, please? So what we're going to do is in that fashion of sharing and giving, sharing this information and these belts, we're going to present them to these representatives of the city of Waterloo tonight.
One thing I just forgot to mention too, when he was talking about what the month is, my shirt is strawberry. Our heat, that's the month that's what we call this month. Our heat, they're just not growing. I sent a picture the other day of an actual ripe strawberry already. But usually it's the month of June that it runs, right from the runners right to the ripe plant near the end of June. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
So just to finish off this presentation, I just want to thank all the support that we've received on behalf of myself and my team, the Ready team, who's joining us as well today. You know, it's been a group effort. You know, we don't do this work alone. We need your help as well. I just want to acknowledge your patience and sitting here and listening to these stories. And as part of this journey, this is just another step in that journey, excuse me, of reconciliation, of understanding, of relearning some of the history that's out there that needs to be told. So again, Yanko, for your time and energy and for listening. Now,
Thank you again, Brian and Martin and Rita, for the honor of receiving these wampum belts. Your gift is a profound symbol of our peace and friendship, and we really appreciate this kind gesture. Thank you.
Come on down to an if you get a chance. We got a little museum now starting to get built up, so you know, if you're in the area, you're welcome to come and see us.
We have our next presentation is by Philip Petrunek with regard to bike theft. Thank you.
Have a hard act to follow, so thank you for that.
We look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, no.
Yes, you're the spokesperson for the bike theft.
Luckily, this is going to take like half a minute to start up so I can start reading, and that gives me a minute because, wow. Yeah, yeah, the Great Law of Peace, honestly, is like an amazing, like, political document, like, right up there with the Magna Carta in terms of like just how much it reshaped the culture and like guaranteed over millennia of peace. So that is like, yeah, wow. Okay, so anyway, now to a lighter topic, something that impacts, thousands of people a year. All right, hi there, is it on? Yeah, it's on. You can hear me and I can hear me. So, hi, my name is Philip Trinek. Hope you don't mind. I just want to read some remarks for a while to begin. On Sunday, May 5th, approximately a little before 2 p.m., my bike was stolen from in front of the Waterloo Public Library main branch. A professional thief approached it using a cordless grinder and cut off the lock and rode away with it. I asked to see if they had any footage of the bike rack and was told that the largest library in Waterloo had no external cameras. Yeah. I reported my bike as stolen right away that day. I gave the police all the information I have, but I haven't gotten it back. Yeah. It was the second bike I've had stolen in this city in 4 years. That bike cost me approximately $1,800 when you factor in all the other stuff I put into it, A weatherproof standalone external camera with built-in storage costs like a little under $100, including buying a card to put inside it to record a couple days of footage. A couple $100 could have easily saved me $1,800, I'm hardly blameless myself, though, I made the lock chain too tight, made it very easy for the guy to cut, I purchased an alarm for it like years ago and I never installed it, and I didn't look on the bottom to get the serial number so I could have it on hand to give to the police, making their job all the harder. So my point is this, this is a problem in our city in Ontario, and it's not just a municipal failing or a police failing, it's an individual failing. It's something we all need to work on, So I'm gonna take you on a little tangent. The world's most prolific bike thief is a title held by a man by the name Igor Kenk. He was based out of Toronto running a store selling stolen bikes. He was well known by police to be a bike theft. He had been reported numerous times. When he was finally caught in 2008, they recovered 3,000 stolen bikes. He was sentenced to 30 months and only served 16. When you do the math, that's a little under 4 hours per stolen bike, We don't take bike theft seriously in our society. It's hard to find even numbers, but according to the best numbers I can find, we have about 10 stolen bikes each day, so that's 3,500 bikes for a year, You give that about like a roughly median value of $750, that's 2.6 million stolen per year, 10,000, over 10,000 over the course of the time I've had 2 bikes stolen, It's also a really, really personal thing too, I would have rather someone mug me and take my wallet, than take my bike, because 1, it's more expensive, but 2, it's my bike. It's a very personal thing, It impacts a lot of us. Just, let me ask you something. Hands up if you've had your bike stolen or had a family member had a bike stolen. Let me ask you something, yeah? It's a lot of people, You don't encounter that many people who've had their car stolen or have been mugged, It's not the kind of crime we really think of as a big deal, but it's one of those things that cumulatively is, So, so I just got to get back to my marks. So I decided to go online and ask about more members of our community how they feel it's been affecting them, how the city has been dealing with it. And I don't mean the city as in the municipality, I mean in general, the whole place. One of the users had recorded 2 bikes being stolen, given that police that video, nothing done with it. One of them went up to a guy who was actively stealing a bike, got the video on his face, gave that to the police, still nothing really happened, I had a bike shop that had heard stories about stolen bikes, then heard where they are, and given that information, and not really had anything done with that information on where the bike was. But aside from those individual stories, there was one very common thread. A lot of people are just straight up afraid to ride their bikes. One of the cops I've been talking to in the process of reporting and dealing with this theft, like, she has a really nice fat tire bike. It's probably one of the more expensive ones. And she's ridden it 3 times because she's, afraid it's gonna get stolen. Like, when the cops are afraid of a problem, it's a big problem. Kids are afraid to ride their bikes to school because they know they might get stolen, And there are concrete actions we can take to deal with this issue, Yeah, my mouth's getting dry a little bit. I'm just gonna go off a little cough, but circle back. Like, firstly, Project 529 has had tremendous success with cities, like, partnering with them to cut bike theft in half. Cut bike theft in half, I'm confident we can do even better, and I'm not a professional, I'm just, concerned because this has impacted me so much, but, they are really great professionals that I really recommend you looking into. Project 529, One of the founding members was a police officer who had one day just noticed how there were, a ton of bikes in lockup that they had recovered from thieves, and no one was even trying to, get them back with their owners, So, they're a great organization to work with, and if you take one thing away, working with them is something I'd really recommend, I've also been reaching out to our local police to find out more about how they're dealing with things, but, the person I was dealing with had to go on vacation. It's nothing. I don't have a whole lot of information from them directly, but I don't blame them for that. That said, there are things they can definitely do. Bait bikes are something we've actually been doing in North Bay. They're tremendously successful. Those themselves have, in many places they've tried to cut down bike theft in half. Because a person steals a bike, they get a notification it's riding away, they go nab them, It is incredibly successful. And also just having a dedicated officer. We have 1,200 officers, and granted, some of them are pretty busy, but if we just have one dedicated to this issue, it can make a tremendous difference to our entire community, And that's not just something I'm saying, that's something Rob Blunt, the man I mentioned earlier who helped co-found 529, himself said, And there's also spreading awareness we can do in our schools, telling people, buy proper locks, actually lock up your bike, get the serial number so you can actually identify, so the cops can identify your stolen bike. And then there's the municipality. It's a $100 camera and it really could help me. This facility, has 3 places to park bikes. One there, and there. 2 of those areas have cameras in them, which is great, But there's not a camera there, there's not a camera there. Forest Heights, they have a lock lending program, something great. 529 really recommends lock lending programs for, schools, but also small businesses and such too. But also, they have a lot of bikes locked up and no cameras pointed towards them. And they're far from the only school not to, So as a city, we are spending a lot of money trying to get people out of their cars and onto bikes. And a lot of people want to do that, but part of that equation is solving this very real problem, right? So yeah, now I'm just gonna open the floor.
Thank you for your presentation, Philip. Any councilors have any comments, concerns, questions for Philip?
Oh, yeah?
Councilor Wright.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Phil. My bike's name was Lizzie, and I miss her. She was awesome. My family was affected multiple times, including our bike trailer that had my kid's backpack when he was in kindergarten. So yeah, I've experienced all of this firsthand multiple times. And so I'm just curious whether you have reached out to the Waterloo Region Police Services about signing on to Project 529?
Well, like I said, I was communicating with an officer who then had to go on vacation, so I talked to her and she directed me to some other people to start speaking with, and so I'm engaging with them. But yeah, I will be recommending 529 for them as well. Ultimately, you guys are the kinds of people who give them the resources and the direction to go in, they're the hands, you're the head. So speaking with you is more me directly engaging. But yeah, I would ultimately like to talk with the chief of police and recommend they work with him too, because 529 works with schools, they work with municipalities, and they work with local police forces, you know? And I'm sorry about your bike. Oh, that sucks so hard, yeah.
Okay, well, just as a follow-up, I'd be happy to reach out to our community liaison officer to follow up on that. And then secondly, we do have bike lockers in Uptown Waterloo, and they tend to be pretty effective. I'm hoping, maybe staff can answer this at a later point, but I'm hoping that we will be expanding those in the future. It makes it a lot safer for people who are parking their bikes all day to ensure that they're in a safe place.
Yeah, the bike lockers can definitely be effective. Individual bike lockers are very good because thieves can't really tell what's inside them. The collective locks, the collective areas people have, you know, they can go in and put their bike inside and then lock them up inside a cage. In the Reddit thread, a lot of people had reported their bikes being stolen from them because it's like, particularly in apartment buildings, so those aren't the greatest solution themselves. They are definitely a step. This is a problem that has like a lot of solutions that need to be combined together. But yeah, absolutely. But that can help, certainly. We really do need to be getting the guys though, and yeah. Okay, great, sorry. Anyone else? All good.
Any other questions for Philip?
No?
Thank you, Philip, for your presentation. I recently had my bike stolen as well. I'm around Philip and Columbia, and yeah, it's not a pleasant experience. It's the type of recycling that we don't appreciate. You know, I think it's a great idea to get Waterloo Regional Police to maybe join up with the Project 529. I see that Guelph Police is connected with these folks as well. So thank you for your presentation.
Cycle Waterloo Region has actually been reaching out to 529 as well. You may have heard of them. They advocate for, you know, safer biking. So yeah. Awesome. Have a great day. Thank you very much.
We will now move to staff reports. Grand River Source Protection Plan update. Report IPPW 2024-029, prepared by Robin McMullen. There is a recommendation that Council approve the report and that Council support the technical updates proposed for the Grand River Source Protection Plan that apply within the City of Waterloo. Can I get a mover and seconder for that report? Oh, sure, yeah.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I just have two quick questions. So I'm assuming that the Region of Waterloo will be doing the public consultation later on?
Essentially, yes. The consultation is actually led by the Source Protection Committee, but the region is the municipal lead,
Right.
so yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that. And secondly, can you, I didn't see this in the report, so I was just curious, but what is the rationale behind the addition and removal of the different parcels of land within the protection area?
Through the chair, so the source protection is at its base is based on a series of concentric rings around wellheads. So it's based on sensitivity and vulnerability, and its time of travel zone. So the further you get from the well and the less sensitive the soil or the less vulnerable the soils, the policy requirements are less, and the closer you get to a well and the more vulnerable that well, the policy restrictions are higher. So in this case, because the region needed it's two replacement wells and an installation of a new well, it reconfigured basically those protection areas around those wells, and also it was an opportunity to update the information and kind of all the technical mapping that goes into it. Does that answer your question?
That does answer everything. Thank you.
Can I please have a mover and seconder for this recommendation? Councillor Rowe and Councillor Wright. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. We will now move to our public meetings, the informal public meeting. This is an informal public meeting to consider item 8A. 8A is official plan amendment to number 56 and zoning bylaw amendment Z2408 Northfield Equities Corporation. 170 to 200 Northfield Drive, and 570 to 655 Weber Street North. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future meeting. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of a formal public meeting. Registry is right at the back. Anybody who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located at the desk at the rear of council chambers. If there is more than one registry, make sure that you're assigning the appropriate one. The planner, Amino Bello, will now provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair, Mayor McCabe, members of council and the public. This is a formal public meeting to provide an overview on official plan amendment number 56 and zoning bylaw amendment application Z-24-08. The applications were submitted by Four Stone Capital Management Limited, represented by MHBC Planning. The subject lands, shown on the screen above us here, shown in red, measures approximately 16.2 hectares in size, and is located in the northeast part of the city, bounded by Weber Street North and Northfield Drive. The subject lands currently contain various commercial and employment uses. It's known as the Waterloo Corporate Campus. In terms of surrounding uses, we have north office uses and various manufacturing uses, employment. To the east, we have the rail corridor, Market Trail, and various office and other employment uses. To the south, we have the Waterloo Fire Station, a number of commercial uses, and obviously the Northfield LRT station directly south. To the west, we have commercial uses, also known as the Northfield Commercial Center, Center Plaza, as well as other townhouse and six-story multiple dwelling to the west. Here's a conceptual site plan of the proposed development. The applicant is proposing to amend the official plan and amend the zoning bylaw to permit a development containing 4,267 dwelling units comprised of 13 towers ranging in building heights from 25 to 40 stories with a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. It's supported by 5,000 plus or minus vehicle parking spaces and upwards of 2,773 bicycle parking spaces. In addition, 630 square meters of commercial space are proposed in one of the towers at the corner of Northfield and Parkside Drive, as well as upwards of 21,000 square meters of employment use dispersed in the north part of the site, shown as buildings K, L, I, and J. As you can see, those larger footprints in the north portion of the site. Also, the applicant is proposing 2 privately owned, publicly accessible spaces, also known as POPs. These are privately owned public spaces that will be accessible to the public as well as the residents of this development, as well as a linear open space along the east portion of the site, abutting the existing Market Trail. The next set of slides will take us to the development phasing. The development itself will be proposed over multiple years, and this slide here just walks us through the different phases. So in phase 1 of the development, it will comprise of 7 towers with built forms upwards of 25 and 40 stories, containing about 2,504 residential dwelling units. Also a commercial space in one of the towers, measuring about 630 square meters. Of the POPs, it would be a 0.14 hectares and a linear open space along the east, measuring 0.17 hectares in size. Moving on to phase 2, this comprises of most of the business employment areas. It will comprise of 3 one-story buildings and about 15K of industrial employment uses, as well as 3,890 flexible industrial commercial space as a transition from that traditional in industrial space, also 329 parking spaces, and a 0.7 hectares of later open space shown in green to the east. And finally, we have the third stage of development, which would round out the full development of the subject site, which comprises of 6 towers ranging in building heights between 25 and 35 stories, upwards of 1,700 residential units, 2,714 square meters of flex industrial commercial space, and finally the other half of the POPs measuring 0.17 hectares in size. Upon full build out, the subject development will contain about 7,000 future residents, 603 jobs, and the commercial space that I outlined earlier in my discussion. In terms of the official plan, the current designation is employment under Schedule A of the official plan, and business employment under the Schedule 2. Also, there's a site-specific provision area, 42, which establishes the vision of the site as currently a business employment center. It's also located in a major node under the Schedule B, and the permissions for height are 81 meters for business employment. The pictures on the far right of our screen show the existing official plan designation, and it's also important to note that Schedule J also shows the station area, which the subject lands are located in, as well as other important elements, including the LRT, the station area boundary, and the potential transition area, which I will explain later on in our presentation here. In terms of the current framework under the zoning bylaw, the lands are currently zoned business employment 2B, which permits a range of uses, includes advanced tech, light industrial, includes light industrial assembly, manufacturing, processing, as well as a major office. And it's also important to note that residential uses are currently prohibited under this zone. We now move on to the applicant's requests for amendments to the official plan. The applicant proposes to redesignate the southerly portion of the subject land from employment to mixed-use high-density residential, as shown in the first image on the top right of our screen. It's important to note that the frameworks set under the municipal comprehensive review done by the regional official plan number 6 established the framework for removing the employment land designation, and that's why we see this 150 meters plus or minus established through this official amendment is implementing that framework set under the region. The applicant has also proposed to modify the special provision area 42 to remove, as I mentioned earlier, the employment land designation from the SPA, permit additional height and density permissions for the residential portion, permit warehousing, wholesale, logistics, distribution uses for the northerly portion of the lands, and limit commercial building floor areas and their locations specifically, which would be implemented through the zoning bylaw. Now moving on to the requested zoning bylaw amendments. The applicant has proposed to rezone the southerly portion of the lands from the business employment 2B zone to mixed-use residential. That's the RMU 81 zone, which would include, just in summary, new site-specific provisions and modify the existing site-specific provisions C117 to recognize the full build-out of the existing commercial site. So these are the lands that can contain the Sobeys site, the existing surface parking, and other commercial uses. And I'll take a deeper dive into the requested site-specific amendments proposed by the applicant, starting with the residential portion of the lands. So as depicted in the slide before, this is the 150 meters south, or actually north of Northfield Drive. The applicant is proposing to reduce the lot frontage minimum to 18 meters, reduce the street line setback minimum to 3 meters, and increase building height of I believe it's 137 meters. It's not shown on the screen here. Increase the maximum density to 1,600 bedrooms per hectare, and reduce the landscape open space minimum to 15%, and this would be measured across the lands that are zoned for residential. And an increased horizontal tower dimension from 46 for certain towers and 43 meters for Tower D. Moving on to the site-specific provisions for the employment zones, they will allow additional uses which include warehousing, wholesale, logistics as primary uses. Allow additionally secondary uses such as retail, liquor, and veterinarian clinics. Limit the building floor area for these uses for the specific industrial and commercial buildings, and limit these uses to a maximum of 40% of the building floor area for the flex commercial buildings, and exempt the regulations for split zoning to apply. Various studies and plans were submitted to support this application. They're listed here below. Staff will consider these studies in formulating an opinion and recommendation for the application that's before us here today. This just provides the public and members of council an idea of what staff is reviewing. Just generally, in terms of the planning justification report, this will set the policy framework, and staff will review that currently as we speak. Urban design matters will review the built form, pedestrian circulation, and things of that sort. The land use compatibility will be measured in terms of the residential and sensitive uses in context with the employment uses that are proposed. And the other studies kind of speak for themselves. In terms of process and next steps, as I mentioned, staff is currently reviewing all technical studies, reports, and plans. We will gather feedback and comments from the public, internal departments, and external stakeholders. We will then consolidate these responses and provide comments to the applicant. If there's opportunity, there'll be potentially refining the application, resubmission, and recirculation, if applicable. Staff will prepare a report to council for recommendations for council's consideration, and at that point, we would hold a formal public meeting for council's decision. In closing, as mentioned by the chair, this application is currently in review, and this is an informal public meeting to gather feedback on the proposal at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bello. Does any counselor have any questions for staff? Please remember that this is an informal public meeting, and only questions of clarification may be asked. Council members should not express opinions at this point. Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Chair. Thank you so much, Aminu, for that presentation. I'm wondering if you can clarify for me, or just remind me, what the minimum landscape percentage is for a development.
Through the chair to Councillor Rowe. So the minimum landscape requirement under the RMU 81 zone is 30%, but we also have to recognize that the lands are currently zoned EB2 with a site-specific 117 on it, which requires 15% for the lands that are denoted for business employment. So the applicant is proposing to change the zone to RMU 81, which requires a minimum 30% landscape open space.
Thank you.
Councillor Bodley.
Sorry, thank you. Through you, Chair Roach. Just to follow up on that, does and pardon my ignorance here, or just as a reminder, as we go up from RMU 20 to RMU 40 to RMU 80, does the percentage of landscape open space change, i.e. you need more when you're up at RMU 80 than you do at RMU 20? Could you remind us of that, please?
Through the chair to Councillor Broadley, the landscape open space is 30% uniformly across all of the RMU zones.
Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Chair. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask one question. Aminu, I'm also wondering if you can advise, in terms of the shadow study, is there an opportunity for the shadow study, or have we seen it in the past where the visual is expanded so we can understand the distance that the shadow impact would have? Because I see within the shadow study that it is within a certain range, but it's hard to say how that will impact the surrounding neighborhoods.
Through the chair to Councillor Rowe, I believe what you're mentioning is the study limits of this shadow study shown in the drawings. I don't have them here to show the public or councillors, but given this is a Bill 109 file, there could be opportunities for revisiting, but considering the timelines, there may not be an opportunity to have a revised shadow study to be submitted.
Mayor McCabe.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and through you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Does the current zoning allow, like under the commercial, would it allow for childcare in this area?
Through the chair to Mayor McCabe, the EB2 zone does permit childcare as a non-retail use, as an ancillary use, so it would be secondary or subordinate to the primary use. So to answer your question, yes, childcare would be permitted.
It could be? Okay, thank you. That's good to know. I'm also just wondering if you could comment on the infrastructure that currently exists in the area in terms of, you know, like just the general hard infrastructure that we have there. Would you, in your opinion, do you think there's upgrades needed to it in order to accommodate a development of this size?
Through the chair to Mayor McCabe, given this is an informal public meeting, I'm unable to comment on staff's opinion on whether infrastructure is appropriate. But to answer your question broadly, there is a LRT station north of or south of the subject site, which is a Northfield LRT station. So it is in a major station area, so we do have infrastructure to support that in terms of walkability and things of that sort. The subject site also fronts onto Weber Street and Northfield Drive, which are regional roads, which are intended to accommodate more significant in terms of intensification. And also, it's important to recognize these lands were formerly designated for employment uses of more of higher intensity and intensification. So that will be considered in staff's review of the applications.
Okay, thank you. And apologize if I worded that incorrectly. But, and then my last question, if I may, through the chair, do you know when this was the NCR property, do you know how many employees used to work in this area? Like ballpark it?
I'm unable to comment on the exact number of employees proposed under the, or originally proposed under the NCR lands, but I can comment on what the applicant has proposed under this current application, and that's 603 jobs.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Bodley.
Sorry, thank you, through you, Chair Roach. This is maybe a question that is related to our forthcoming OP review. That ties into the site that's here. RMU 81, I believe, is the highest height designation that we currently have under our current official plan, or within the zoning bylaw under our current official plan. As part, and I appreciate that we have had some applications come in since the adoption of the zoning bylaw that have site-specific provisions to go above 81 meters. I'm curious if you can provide us with a sneak peek or with some feedback as to whether or not our forthcoming official plan is going to contemplate a zoning regulation or contemplate an official plan designation that would permit a zoning designation of, say, RMU 120, something that would be higher than 81 meters. Is that something that's being contemplated at this point in time through the OP or not?
Through the chair to Councillor Bodley, it's my understanding that our community planning colleagues are reviewing the official plan and are reviewing opportunities for increasing height and density. There also has been a built form review that was done by our, we retained a consultant that provides recommendations to city staff and council on what opportunities there may be, but considering that official plan amendments that are being put forward by our colleagues are still in draft form, I'm unable to comment on what permissions, if any, would be above the current 25 meter or 25 stories in terms of height and 81 meter height limits that are currently under the official plan.
Okay, that's helpful though. Thank you, Aminu. And lastly, through you, Chair Roach, we've received a number of comments about traffic backing up on Northfield, and I note that there's a transportation study here. But have we, as someone not being a transportation expert, but just as someone who has driven on that road on the way to Rim Park to play hockey sometimes, it does back up quite a bit. And I think it's probably the worst LRT stop in terms of how much it backs up from anywhere in the city. Have we talked to our regional colleagues around the signal timing on when the tracks come down there, or when the gates come down there over the tracks at Northfield? Because my layperson's perspective on that is that it's too early.
Perhaps our acting CAO, Ron, could answer that question?
Thanks, Chair Roach, and through you to Councillor Bodley. This has come up a number of times, Councillor Bodley, with staff as well, and Bob Henderson, through his channels with the region, has raised the issue of the cycle time of the signals, in particular for the Ion LRT. It is very slow, and we are aware of the queuing that results. I think there's good caution on behalf of Grand Link and the region to make sure that the cycle time is appropriate to protect the train movements. However, I think this will be a continued item that we need to work on with the region to optimize what that time is to alleviate the backups that we're seeing. So it is a work in progress. Thanks.
Any other questions from council? Just actually, it kind of got me to think about the traffic, and I do know that there's a traffic study. Does a traffic study take into account the future building of, about 400 meters away from there, the Kraus lands? Does it take in consideration that traffic as well?
Through the chair to you. Yes, the application did include a traffic impact study, and the term that's used is background traffic. That's the horizon traffic for what's considered for the baseline. And the Kraus lands, known as 465 Conestoga Road, was included in the analysis in terms of measuring what the background traffic is.
Great, thank you. And then back to our acting CAO, Ron, we have our fire chief here too. I drive that road every day, and I've seen actually fire trucks stuck in traffic with their lights going, and they can't move. Is there any future plans with the region of Waterloo with regard to dealing with traffic? There's going to be about 8,000 or 10,000 new units in that probably 500-meter area.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Roach, Chair Roach. I think I'll let Rich weigh in on the fire response aspect of it, but I can tell you that the region will review the traffic study that Aminu mentioned today as part of this application. The applicant will need regional clearance to access the regional roads for anything beyond that, that's currently there now. And that would require a comprehensive review of how all of the signalized intersections in this area are working to prevent, level of service failure, if you can call it that, at the intersection. So long queue lines, people stranded at intersections, and certainly conflicts with the Ion LRT and emergency vehicles.
Thank you. Fire Chief?
Thank you for the question, Chair Roach. When we talk about these concerns with intensification, traffic, vertical response, as we shared with Council over the past couple of years, responding to high rises is a little bit more complex. And, I'm taken back to conversations we had and shared with the public about the 3 lines of defense that were covered in the Fire Master Plan that include public education, fire code, the application of an emergency response. And to Council's credit, and working with the consultant staff and partners, all of these areas were looked at, follow through to Council's approval of addressing intensification and expansion across the city. We flagged areas of traffic throughout the city as a reality, but choosing to work within it. And so, the upside to what we're talking about is there is progressive growth as a result of the Fire Master Plan with staffing, equipment, and resources. Addresses all 3 areas of the lines of defense. And the real upside here for this area, when we talk about Northfield, when we talk about the Kraus lands, you couldn't have a fire station in a better location. It's right in the middle of it. And oftentimes with growth, it's very difficult to confirm land in those areas, but it happens to be at the center of these developments, which really is the upside. And, you know, my parting comment would be, we did focus a lot on the west side, seeing some response gaps there and therefore opportunities which are being addressed. But that truck and that vehicle, all vehicles throughout the city respond throughout the city. So any growth and development that council has approved and we're prepared to progressively do, a truck in the west side, by example, supports the east side or the center of town. So we'll continue to monitor, work with staff, and work within the changes and partners to make improvements as Ron has indicated.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any other questions for staff? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, through you, Chair. With the two developments in consideration, the Kraus Carpet Lands and now this development, I mean, I think it's fair to probably assume that there will be families potentially living in some of the multi-bedroom units. And all of our school locations in this neighborhood are further to the west and located in the lower density neighborhoods. So I'm just wondering what the city's approach might be in the context like this of, you know, what kinds of investments need to be made for the walkability of the neighborhood with this level of density coming in, and with the regional road aspect of it, ensuring that we actually have the capability to move through this neighborhood on foot.
Through the chair to Councillor Wright, so I'll answer your question in kind of two parts. In terms of the school component, we obviously would defer to the school boards to provide us feedback and advice on what appropriate based on their program needs. So that's portion one of the question. Portion two, in terms of pedestrian activity, pedestrian connections, considering this is a major station area, that's an important priority for planning staff's consideration in terms of making this neighborhood walkable, in terms of what the surrounding uses are and what this development will ultimately be. So that would also be a consideration in terms of the schools around and whether the school board provides feedback on those correct requirements.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? I will now ask any registered delegations to come forward. First up, we have Trevor Hawkins.
Thank you, Chair Roach. Good afternoon, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here on behalf of the owner, Northfield Equities, Inc. and Forgestone Capital Management, as well as several members of the project team, including Turner Fleischer Architects and LEA Transportation. Just to sort of pick up on what Mr. Bello indicated about the location, so we've indicated the 5-minute walking distance and the 10-minute walking distance with the two circles. We can see the lands actually proposed for development are essentially east of the existing commercial plaza. So we have the Sobeys, a number of the commercial buildings along Weber, the Shoppers Drug Mart, as well as the building under construction along Northfield. And then we have the two office buildings, and then the balance of the lands are undeveloped. So there's a large parcel of the land undeveloped within 3 or 4 minute walk of the LRT platform. So it's an unusual situation, certainly with regard to all the other station areas, to have this much land unbuilt this close to the station platform. So the platform's here, there's a signal, so you have a direct pedestrian connection from the development safely across at a signal to the platform. We can see within a walk of this particular project, there are many employers, so there's a significant amount of employment within a 5-minute walk and then within a 10-minute walk. So this is a situation where we have a property that has a number of supportive commercial uses on the site, right in the site, as well as employment proposed for this site, as well as employment effectively surrounding it on 3 sides. So it is a true mixed-use situation. What really is missing from this station area and from close proximity to the platform itself is new residential development. And that was one of the reasons the region took this piece of land, the first 150 meters from Northfield, out of the station area, all the way across the frontage, in recognition that a healthy station area has people who are arriving in the morning to go to their job in this station area, but also people who are using the train to go in the other direction where they already live here. And if they don't happen to work in one of these buildings that surrounds the property and they're working elsewhere in the community, they take the train. So it's an origin and a destination, which creates much better balanced ridership levels. Mr. Bello's gone through the project. I just wanted to highlight Parkside Drive effectively already exists and provides access to these two buildings. It routes around the property and provides an entry point from Weber Street. So that's all remaining. Really the focus of the development in the initial phases is on the balance of the site that's not developed. The phasing, as Mr. Bello went through, sort of indicates that these two office buildings are not planned for the immediate phase. So they're much further out. This is a project that will have a, perhaps multiple decade type build out, sort of 10 to 20 years build out. It's not a project where council will see all these towers built 3 or 4 years from now. So I think that's an important consideration when we think about some of the technical aspects, some matters regarding traffic, but also sort of the evolution of the site and some of the statistics that we're advancing, particularly parking supply and things of that nature. As this project builds out over a number of years, the demand for parking, for example, will likely shift, or at least we're all hoping it shifts. And when we get to the sort of buildings in the third phase, and the demand for vehicular parking is significantly less than it is when the first building is built, the zoning that we're working within allows for a much lower parking supply than what the plans show. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking of this in terms of a longer term build out. These are the statistics as we've illustrated on the plan. It really is a variety of building heights. It hides the parking, so really the surface parking areas are at the back of the site, and they are to support the employment uses, which tend to require larger areas of surface parking, particularly for deliveries, as well as trucks leaving the site and using the surface parking areas to load and unload their goods. There isn't a lot of open space in this area today. There's a lot of physical open space in the sense that there's nothing on it. But this project is proposing to create parks effectively, or privately owned parks, or POPs, as council may have heard that term, central to the site, which is in line with the stationary plan, but also the long linear space that we've proposed between the project and the market trail as an opportunity to create another almost over an acre worth of open space for people who are looking to run or jog or walk their dogs. And the hope is that if the region is willing, we'd create a connection from the project to the market trail at the north end of the site, subject to fencing regulations and things of that nature. So we see this as a project that's really pedestrian and cyclist focused first and foremost. Yes, there will be cars, and some of that has to be considered, but it is a very walkable area. It's an area that we're trying to improve the walkability of so that people can get to all of these destinations that I've described. These are some renderings just to illustrate for council, sort of from a massing perspective, what the variety of heights could look like over time. Again, this is a long-term build-out. This is not necessarily how each building is going to look when they're built 15 years from now, but it is an indication of the massing, how the relationship with those POPs, the relationship between the streets, so the Parkside Drive, the relationship between the employment uses at the back of the site, and how those are used to sort of scale down the massing as we go towards the employment uses in the site, but also north and northeast of the site. This is the POPs in the linear space that I touched on. So, opportunities for running to connect you with the market trail if you're someone who wants to run or walk or push a stroller or cycle or scooter. Opportunities for dogs, opportunities for winter programming, a rink, on programmed open space play for all ages, as well as play structures. So we see these spaces as being, multi-generational spaces that would appeal to everyone who may want to live in this project. Amino's really touched on these. The nuts and bolts of it are The region's taken the lands out of the employment area, or at least the southerly portion. The application proposes to change it to permit residential uses consistent with that direction through the region's municipal comprehensive review, and then some amendments to the existing policy framework to sort of recognize that shift. Same with the zoning. There's existing site-specific regulations. It's a very convoluted site-specific zoning bylaw. We're trying to clean it up, sort of to reflect what's there today, allow that to continue, but then to shift and allow the employment and residential components and the ancillary components on the undeveloped portions of the site. These are some of the site-specific regulations we're proposing. Recognizing I only have 2 minutes left, I won't go through them all. I did want to highlight a couple of them. We're proposing some modifications to some of the sizes of the towers, just to allow a little bit of variety, so they're not all point towers. There's a bit of point towers, and there's some longer, what we would call a short slab type building, to allow for a variety of architecture and unit sizes. We touched on the landscape open space, so that's measured on the residential portion. There's also landscape open space on the employment portion, which we're not counting towards that calculation. This minimum lot frontage requirement, so that is to allow for the potential future severance of the land sort of from Parkside. And if we look towards the Market Trail, the only portion of that site that has frontage on Northfield Drive is the Parkside Drive frontage. So really all that's doing is recognizing the existing frontage from the west side of Parkside Drive towards the east boundary of the site in the event that that large undeveloped portion of the site was severed in the future. We're proposing some regulations to allow for the POPs, and then because the property will have multiple zones on it, no regulations that would effectively enforce a lot line where the zoning transitions. For the employment uses, really just to allow a few more employment uses given the location of the site close to regional roads and the highway, take some of the commercial uses that are already permitted on the west side of the site and allow them on the east side of the site because they haven't been built on the west side of the site. Allow for some ancillary uses in the employment buildings to serve both the residents as well as the employees and others in the community who would visit the site, and then put in some regulations about how much floor area that could take up. So just in conclusion, we think this is an ideal site to plan for long-term intensification with residential, commercial, and employment uses. It's ideally situated from a transit and a walkability perspective, and we look forward to working with staff to sort of realize the vision over a number of years.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Hawkins. Are there any questions from council to this delegation? Councillor Bassett.
Thanks, through you, Chair Roach. Thanks, Trevor. My questions are about the POPs. Do you anticipate any challenges working with the region to connect it to Market Trail?
I wouldn't say, I know they will want it fenced. So when you have a rail line next to a property, there will be a requirement that it be fenced. But would they be willing to allow us to put a gate on the fence so that people can access the Market Trail? That's the hope. The way the Market Trail and the boundary of this site exist today, there's a berm from the trail going up to this property. So the berm, there's no safety berm requirement within our site. So it would be a matter of whether they would allow us to put a gate in the fence and access the trail.
Do you anticipate having a gate, i.e. a gated community, will make people feel like it's a publicly accessible space?
That would be the only fencing we're proposing, and that's a requirement. Otherwise, the site would be, Parkside Drive is accessible to the public today. It has a bus route on it today, so there's no plans to change that accessibility.
Yeah, I guess I just am always curious about publicly accessible spaces and if people feel like they can use them. And so if there are barriers to using them on one of the most, maybe one of the paths that might get them to the POPs, would people actually use them, or would it it's obviously going to be a space for the people who live there as well if this were to be approved down the road. So just I'm mostly curious about the barriers to people using them, and I'm also curious if it is fully easy to get into and use. Do you have any sense from past projects about who from outside of the location uses it? Like, do you have statistics on that? Like your pool statistics, no one uses pools. How do
Right.
POPs fare?
Well, this pops, so the difference between this site and perhaps some of the other sites that council may have seen is there's a pattern of people already accessing this property. So people already come to this property to shop or work in the two office buildings. So there's an established pattern of public use of this property. So I don't think this site will have a barrier in the sense that just because buildings are built, people still won't access the site. They will still shop at the stores. While those office buildings are there, they will still visit the site to work. So the POPs will be on their way into the site on both sides. So I think it will actually be a site that will be will lend itself well to the public using it.
Okay, thanks. That gives me a better picture.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'm going to go back to this question about schools. The reason I'm asking about this is so often, the residential part is built and then the school is an afterthought, and then you have to figure out how to shoehorn in. And there's two examples, City Place, two examples from Toronto specifically, City Place and then the Lower Yonge Precinct Elementary School, where the school facilities have been built into the development. And so just following also on Mayor McCabe's comments about the zoning for daycare, just wondering if any thought is being given to the developer about creating this kind of amenity within a complete community part of the development.
Through you, Chair Roach, so the daycare use is permitted. There was a holding provision in place, and so provided the technical aspects could be met, a daycare would be permitted today, and there's no plans to remove that as a permitted use. It's obviously a very complementary use for a project like this for the employment and the residential. If you're referring to like a public school, we would, as Mr. Bello said, take some input from the school boards as to whether they felt a school on this particular property was something that they envisioned in their capital plan or their long-term plan. They would obviously have to acquire some or part of the building or something of that nature. I'm not sure if they've ever pursued that in Waterloo, but it's something that if they raise it, we would certainly engage with them and see how we can work together.
Thank you. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you. Excuse me, sorry. Thank you, through you, Chair Roach. I'm wondering if you could go speak a little bit more to the landscaped open space piece. You're suggesting that there's existing landscaped open space on the broader property that is not being included in this, and maybe I'm just misinterpreting that. So I'm wondering if you could perhaps just give us a little bit more of the justification or the rationale why you think 15% is appropriate given some of the other context of the site.
Through you, Chair Roach, I think what I was suggesting in that comment was that the site-specific is suggesting 15% within this portion of the site, so not including the market trail that the region's expropriated, for example, and not including the linear park beyond, say, this point right here. So there is landscape open space here. There will be landscape open space, although it's not obviously illustrated. There will be landscape open space around all these buildings. There's landscape open space around the commercial buildings. So it's not counting any of that landscape open space. The regulation is only applying to this part of the site.
And sorry, through you, Chair Roach, just to help me further understand that, because obviously I'm missing something. The 15% that you're proposing is just for the area that you had highlighted, or the 15% is for the whole area?
Right. I think Mr. Bello indicated that the existing zoning requires 15% for this property. But when we rezone this part of the site to the RMU zone, no matter which one, it goes up to 30%. So we're proposing to keep it where it is today. So it's a reduction in the technical sense, it goes from 30 to 15, but it's really the same as what was permitted today.
Okay.
So it would be, in other words, 15% would apply everywhere, but the site-specific has to apply here because it has a higher rate when you change that zone.
So maybe one last thing, if I could, sorry, Trevor, through you, Chair Roach. If you were to calculate the open space being proposed in the RMU 80 zone, that with site-specific provisions that's being proposed, it would be higher than 15% on the residential portion of the site?
No, so if you sort of exclude everything north of this line and you focus only on where the residential or mixed-use residential buildings are proposed, 15%. That's the request. Yeah.
Okay, so it is a true reduction that is being sought in terms of the amount of open space by the applicant?
It's a reduction from what the RMU zone would otherwise require.
Okay, so given that, if I can, sorry, through you, Chair Roach, now that I've gotten there, can you maybe provide, particularly given the distance in terms of walkability and the lack of park space and things like that that are in the immediate area, can you provide some justification for why you think that a reduction to this level is appropriate on the site? It seems like there's some really great amenities being proposed on the POPs, which is always good, and the fact that hopefully it'll be a space that the public feels is accessible will assist with some of the other proposed developments that are around there, which sounds really great in theory. But why do you think that why does the applicant think that a reduction from 30 to 15% on this part of the property is appropriate given the few parks that are walkable here?
Through you, Chair Roach, firstly, the landscape open space requirement doesn't in and of itself translate to parks or even outdoor amenity space. I mean, a lot of projects will see the landscape open space, placed along the perimeter of the site, and they may still achieve that 30%, although they're not really creating park space or outdoor amenity space for the residents, employees, or the public. I think this project is taking a different approach in that it is concentrating the landscaped areas into key spaces that would be used and planned and programmed for parks and recreational and passive uses, rather than just soft landscaping. There will still be some soft landscaping, but we're trying to sort of concentrate those areas into key parts of the site that would be a more meaningful use of that landscape open space.
Are there any other questions for this delegation? Mayor McCabe?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Given the size and the scale of this proposed development, I'm curious if there's consideration, if the proponent is considering, I'm thinking of energy systems, like working directly with Innova to create an energy system that would actually could generate electricity, or is it just, what type of energy system is being proposed here?
Through you, Chair Roach, to Mayor McCabe, I would encourage you to read the energy strategy that we did do for this site, because it is fairly robust.
Right.
And it does outline a few greenhouse gas reducing options that could be considered for this site, including solar panels, certainly on some of the rooftops, definitely on the employment areas. Whether we could work with the region to do a type of geothermal system. I think the study actually does talk about designing the site in a way that would allow for a future district energy system, if that was something that this area proposed, beyond this site, but something that this site could tap into. So there is quite a bit of detail in that study and a number of recommendations for the owner and the builders of the buildings to consider to make the most, to achieve the greatest reductions in greenhouse gas.
Yeah, and I did I did read through most of that energy study. It's also complex, but part of what I was curious about is if, because of the way energy systems are changing, if there was interest from the proponent to actually work with Grand River Energy or Innova to rather than just use energy, but to produce energy and sell it back to the grid and really, do something really much more net zero in that space.
Certainly, there is a net zero component to the strategy as well, and that's something that we would be happy to talk about with the energy partners in the region for sure.
Are there any other questions for this delegation from council? I have a question, Mr. Hawkins. There'll be over 4,000 units and a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments. Do we know the breakdown yet of the 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments?
We do. I think it's pretty, here it is. I have to take off my glasses for a second. 48% 1 bedroom, 34% 2 bedroom, and 22% 3 bedroom.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from council? Oh, Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much, Trevor. I'm wondering about affordable housing and if there's any consideration being given for some affordable units in this development.
Councillor Rowe, I'm surprised that I had to wait for the 10th question to get to affordable housing. Certainly, I did talk about affordable housing with Northfield Equities and Fordstone, and I think they're interested in, as the project evolves, working with the region and any incentive programs to bring affordable housing into the project. So I think the more dialogue we can, I know the region provides their standard comments, and we'll get their standard comments, but it would be something that we would want to, explore a little bit more in depth as to what types of programs we could pursue for this project. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for this delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Hawkins. We have a second registered delegation, Mr. Martin Jones from Waterloo. Welcome, Mr. Jones.
Is that on now? Yep, good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. This is a very large development, and I'm just concerned about the impact of on the traffic network in this area. I think we need to take a broader look at traffic and transportation in this whole area, and I think there's some significant issues there. As already been mentioned, Northfield Drive doesn't work particularly well during busy periods. And it's not the capacity of the road, it's that the LRT crosses Northfield Drive eastbound every 15 minutes, twice. And the way the operation of the station works is that this traffic is stopped before the train arrives at the station, then the train arrives, unloads, reloads, then carries on. And then there's also a pedestrian-activated crosswalk across Northfield Drive that allows the pedestrians to cross safely across the road, but that also then stops traffic again, and then if you're really lucky, the southbound train arrives just after that. So you can be stopped there for quite a while at that intersection. What that does is it causes Northfield Drive to back up all the way to Weber Street, and so there are times when you cannot get on Northfield Drive because from either Parkside Drive or Weber Street because traffic is backed up right to the intersection of Northfield and Weber. This development is proposing a significant number of transit trips, I think 1,000 in the AM peak transit trips. What that's going to do is not all of those will use the LRT, I appreciate, but significant number will. That will, I think, require significant frequency increase in the number of trains that are required to accommodate that volume of traffic. Plus, there'll be a huge number of folks trying to cross Northfield Drive to get to Northfield Station. So the situation, in my mind, is only going to get worse as we add more vehicles and more transit trips coming from the north side of Northfield Drive. And I think Northfield Drive is going to become worse and worse and worse over time as that starts to happen. I suggest there needs to be a grade separation. I suggest the LRT tracks need to go over top of Northfield Drive eastbound and hook up on the bridge there. And I think there also needs to be an elevated pedestrian walkway from the north side, from the proposed development side of Northfield Drive across to the elevated LRT station. I think that would help alleviate a lot of the traffic congestion problems and the intersection issues between the LRT and Northfield Drive. A second point is the expressway. There seems to be a big assumption once you get traffic to the expressway, everything's okay. And if you ever drive that during the day, you know at rush hours, it's clogged. You can't get anywhere on the expressway between 3:30 and 5 or in the morning the other direction. And I think there needs to be dialogue with the province. I think the expressway needs to be widened to 3 or 4 lanes all the way from where it currently is 4 lanes near Lancaster Street all the way to Northfield Drive. And I think that needs to happen over time as this development proceeds. There's a couple, I think, minor issues on Northfield Drive. The driveway that exits the current commercial site next to Shoppers Drug Mart. A lot of people try and turn left out of there onto Northfield Drive during busy times or turn left into that driveway. I've seen several collisions. I've seen a lot of near misses, and I think that needs to be fixed either with a median between Parkside and Weber Street or with a continuous left turn lane between Parkside and Weber Street. Similarly, on Weber Street, next to the Starbucks site, I believe there's a traffic signal proposed at that location, but I think there needs to be a further left turn lane to allow traffic to enter that Parkside Drive from Weber Street in order to alleviate concerns there. And then I think, and as a broader look, I think as traffic kind of gets more and more busy in that area, I think Benjamin Road and the other access to the expressway via Farmers Market Road is getting busier and busier. And I think as part of a broader look at transportation, I think now's the time to look at that and see if there's any improvements that need to be made in that area so that that provides another decent access to the expressway from the northern part of Waterloo. So, jurisdiction. I've heard a lot of, the region is involved with the roads. We've got the LRT, city streets, province. This is a big development. The City of Waterloo, I feel, needs to take charge and needs to take control and needs to insist on some of the developments that are proposed on regional roads or the province roads needs to happen in conjunction with this development. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for your presentation. Are there any questions from council to this delegation? Mayor McCabe.
Yeah, thank you through you, Chair, and thanks for coming in, Martin. I just want to clarify what you meant by a grade separation with the LRT. Are you suggesting that the LRT would go up and over?
Correct. Yes, I am. Expensive? You bet. But I think it's necessary. I think that's the only way that you're going to have to avoid that conflict between the cars, pedestrians, and LRT.
Okay. Yeah, that would be an extremely expensive solution. I'm just trying to imagine it because of the grade that would need to come and plus there's the curve. But anyway, okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood whether you were talking about going up this way or having the road go underneath the rail or what exactly you were thinking there. Okay.
Over top, yep. Just across the eastbound over top because the tracks go down the center of Northfield Drive. Mm-hmm. So that would leave the fire station accessible and all the other side of Northfield Drive accessible. So it would be just the LRT construction. Would have been better to do it in the first place.
Well, that's what was also going through my head was that I wonder what was contemplated when the LRT was initially, particularly that area when it was initially being discussed and proposed and that, I mean, surely there were people that were considering what that kind of conflict there, I'm looking at Ron, because I think you were probably at the city then, what that conflict would be. But okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure I understood what you were suggesting.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for your presentation. Councillor Bodley, you had questions for staff?
Yeah, thank you through your chair, Roach, and thank you, Mr. Jones, for your presentation there. In slightly more financially feasible suggestions that the delegate had put forward there, do we have we had any conversations or considerations? You know, he brings up a point around a pedestrian access from one side of Northfield to the other. And I know as part of the Krause Carpets development, there was a proposal that ultimately we're still waiting for MTO to hopefully maybe someday in the future engage with us on pedestrian crossing over the expressway. Is there any consideration for pedestrian crossing over Northfield, you know, akin to what we have on University for the University that connects from one side of University to the other side for the University of Waterloo? Is that something that's feasible or been discussed or thought of?
Through the chair to Councillor Bodley, so I would lean on my transportation colleagues to provide that input in terms of whether it's feasible. So I don't necessarily have any comment on whether that location is appropriate for a pedestrian overpass connection.
Go ahead, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Chair Roach. To Councillor Bodley, The engineering involved would certainly be something like if this infrastructure was deemed required, that would all be considered by the region of Waterloo. I can advise that the transportation impact study is looking at options for pedestrian access through the area, and anything deemed required through that transportation impact study that crosses Northfield Drive would be to the approval of the region.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Any other questions for council to staff? Is there anyone else present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Please provide your name and municipality of residence for the record.
My name is Ashwin Annamalai. I'm a resident of the city of Waterloo. Good evening, Chair. Very excited to see this proposal. I'm all for it. The region of Waterloo is the fastest growing region in terms of population. The stats are out. Between 2022 and 2023, we've added almost 40,000 people. That is the population of Stratford. We are very fortunate to have such high growth, but with such high growth, there's like really big challenges, especially when it comes to housing. So projects like these, where we can add 4,000 more homes, is the need of the hour, and would like to see more proposals like these put forward to council as well. So our population did grow by 40,000 in a span of 1 year in the region. So we did not build as much housing. So do you wonder like where all these people live? These people are families, multiple families living in the same house. If it's a 2-bedroom unit, it's shared by 2 families. So what happens is that there's a lot of pressure on city services, but since we are not adequately housing these people, we are not able to collect sufficient revenues in terms of property taxes. By providing people their own space, we not just give them more room to live, but we also collect more in property taxes. So it's a win for the city, it's a win for the taxpayer, it's a win for the people. So this is what I would call a win-win-win situation. So we have to encourage more density, and I'm glad to see like density up to 40 stories. But I'm slightly disappointed with the number of parking lots for 4,000 homes. Do we need 5,000 plus parking spots at the expense of green spaces? So maybe we could cut down on more parking spaces and expand that into green spaces. Rents in our city are rising by double-digit percentage year over year. So would love to see this become a purpose-built rental. The federal government has provided a lot of incentive to build purpose-built rentals. So would love to see this proposal become a purpose-built rental. We don't know if it's a purpose-built rental or a condo building. So that's a suggestion that I would also like to see in this development. But overall, really excited for this. Thank you so much for your time, Council.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council to this delegation? Seeing none, if there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. We now move to consideration of notice of motion given at a previous meeting. There's none. Notice of motions? None. Communication and correspondence? None. Unfinished business? None. Questions for staff? None. We go to new business. Any new business? New business. Not last week's business. New business. Go ahead, Councillor Hamner. I'm just joking.
It's rather exciting. I was going to give you a compliment, and I still will do that.
Okay.
Just a couple of shout outs to some exciting things that happened last week. We had Waterloo residents identified or recognized for contribution to the community. Athlete of the Year went to Caitlin Kramer. And the Waterloo Minor Hockey Association was recognized by KSA as the organization of the year, achieving an award of excellence. So congratulations, Councillor Roche. It was a good honor for the organization. And then finally, even though she doesn't really live in Waterloo, the office is located in Waterloo. Kathy Brothers from Capacity Canada was recognized as the Citizen of the Year. So quite a big honor for a lot of people who do a lot for our community. So congratulations to all.
Excellent. Any other new business? Councillor Bassick.
Thanks, through you, Chair Roach. I assume someone's going to talk about the Pride Walkway and Tri-Pride and also the opening of the square. So I won't say those things unless no one does. So I'll just stick in the ward, and for the last year, staff have been working with residents in Dunvegan Park to organize a community garden, and it got all put up this past weekend. I was only able to be there for an hour and a half, but I think the volunteers worked all day, and they put up all the boards and the cardboard and the dirt, and a big thanks to the one, they're all doing a huge amount of work, of course, but it does take one person to really spearhead it, and that's Les, and so a big thanks to him.
Great, thank you. Any other new business? Seeing none?
My
Councillor
hand
Wright.
was forced since Councillor Bassick
Yes, okay,
kept
that's true.
herself in check. I just want to shout out to staff for all the support that they provided for the launch of Pride Month. It was numerous teams all working collaboratively with the BIA and with the launch of the square as well. It's so deeply appreciated. People just thought it was awesome. It was very lively on Friday night, and it's just, again, just really appreciated ensuring that Uptown can be that lively and that welcoming. Thanks.
Excellent. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through Chair Roach. I also wanted to acknowledge that the University of Waterloo hosted a conference that Mayor McCabe spoke at last week on the United Nations SDGs. Well done, Mayor McCabe. And Councillor Wright was there as well, too. It was great to be there. And as much as we acknowledge some of the Pride events that went on, Tri-Pride was this weekend as well, too, in Kitchener. I did want to highlight, I had a staff member acknowledge to me that last week we didn't speak to the fact that the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia is on May 17th. And there was an event at Kitchener City Hall that myself and Mary Lou were at. And it was a really great reminder that while we're in the middle of Pride Month, and Pride is, a moment of celebration for many, that we still have to remember that Pride is a protest, and there's still there were a lot of speakers at that event speaking about rights being lost by the 2S LGBTQ+ community. And so I thank that staff member for calling us out for not speaking to the fact that we were at that event as well, too. Very important for us to acknowledge that, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other new business? We'll go to enactment of bylaws, and can I get a mover and seconder for enactment of bylaws? Councillor Wright and Mayor McCabe. Can I get a mover and seconder for adjournment? Oh, sorry. Yes. All in favor? I assumed that. I shouldn't have. That was unanimous, by the way. Just helping the clerk out. Can I get a mover and a seconder for the adjournment of this meeting? Councillor Wright and Councillor Hanmer. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Good night.